Wolfgang Van Halen, for most of his life, lived under a shadow, the kind cast by a legend. The son of guitar virtuoso Eddie Van Halen and actress Valerie Bertinelli, he grew up surrounded by fame, talent, and expectations he never asked for. But behind the smiles and the stage lights, his story has been one of loss, loneliness, and an uphill fight to prove that his name was more than an inheritance. What began as a childhood surrounded by music would become a lifelong test of identity and survival. The shadow and the spark. For Wolfgang, music was never just a career choice. It was something in his DNA. But for most of his life, that gift came with a burden. Being the only son of Eddie Van Halen, one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived, meant living under constant comparison. From the moment he could walk, the world had already decided who he should become. But what no one saw was the quiet war inside him. A fight to be heard as his own person, not just a reflection of a legend. Born in 1991 to Eddie Van Halen and Valerie Bertinelli, Wolfgang entered a world of fame and noise that he didn't ask for. The cameras, the fans, the myth of Van Halen, all of it existed before he even understood what music really was. Yet inside his home, things were surprisingly ordinary. Valerie and Eddie wanted him to grow up grounded, not spoiled by celebrity. They didn't push him toward the stage or the studio. Instead, they gave him space to find himself. "My mom did a really good job at grounding me," he once said. It wasn't lavish or insane. It felt completely normal. Even in a household where rock stars dropped by like neighbors, Wolfgang's childhood wasn't glamorous. He spent more time with toys than instruments, more time with cartoons than guitars. To the outside world, he was destined to inherit his father's crown. But inside, he was just a shy, curious boy with a gentle streak. A kid who loved music but didn't yet realize it would define him. That innocence didn't last forever. One day, while exploring his father's record crates, he stumbled across a stack of Van Halen albums. The cover showed crowds, lights, and his father holding a guitar that seemed almost alive. "I saw my name on the box," he recalled years later, "and I asked my dad, 'What's this?' He said, 'Oh, yeah. This is what I do.'" That moment, simple and quiet, shattered his world. The man who had taught him how to ride a bike wasn't just his father. He was a hero to millions, but that realization came with pressure. From then on, every note Wolfgang played would be measured against a legend. Every compliment would be followed by a comparison. He was blessed and cursed by a name that carried history. Yet, even as a child, he seemed to understand that the only way forward was through authenticity. He didn't want to be the next Eddie Van Halen. He wanted to be the first Wolfgang Van Halen. In the years to come, that decision to carve out his own identity, while honoring his father's legacy, would shape everything. His music, his relationships, and the way he handled tragedy. Behind the success and the fame lay a story of quiet resilience built not on privilege, but on perseverance. This is the story of how a boy born in the shadow of greatness learned to shine on his own terms. As Wolfgang grew, curiosity became obsession. After years tapping drums on magazines and makeshift kits, by the time he reached his teenage years, he found himself drawn to guitar. Not to reproduce his father's solos, but to discover sound from his own soul. Eddie, legendary genius though he was, didn't teach scripts. He strummed riffs only he could do. So Wolfgang taught himself, late-night sessions, studying tabs, experimenting with distortion, rhythm, melody. until he found a voice that sounded like anguish and hope and teenage rebellion all in one chord. The press loved to mention his lineage more than its progress. Every new photo, every headline, every whispered rumor tagged him as Eddie Van Halen's son. Even before he stepped on stage, people had already decided who he was and who he wasn't. His mother Valerie tried to shield him from the noise, but when you're carrying a name like Van Halen, silence is never enough. Then came 2006, the year that changed everything. Eddie, whose health had been fragile for years, invited his son to jam with him and his brother Alex. To everyone's surprise, the chemistry was real. Alex was floored when he heard Wolfgang laying down bass lines no one expected. "That's Wolfgang?" he asked in disbelief. It wasn't just a proud family moment. It was the spark of something much bigger. At 15, Wolfgang officially joined Van Halen as their bassist. For fans, it was controversially labeled nepotism. For Wolfgang, it was a trial by fire. He walked into arenas full of fans loyal to the original lineup, critics ready to pounce, and a weight on his back heavier than any bass guitar. The 2007 to 2008 reunion tour with David Lee Roth, the old Van Halen lead singer, would test every ounce of his resolve and mark the beginning of his lifelong battle to prove he wasn't just someone's son, but a musician in his own right. The early shows were rough, on stage, and in his heart. But Wolfgang pushed harder, and over time, those harsh riffs and rock riffs became not symbols of expectation, but proof. Proof that he belonged. The band released the 2012 album, A Different Kind of Truth, and while some still whispered about legacy, others started to listen. But fame came at a cost. Criticism left scars deeper than bruises. The hate, the comments, the knuckles down comparisons. They damaged him. He said later, "That did a lot of damage to me. He wasn't just trying to make music, he was trying to survive it." As Wolfgang matured, his need for artistic freedom grew. In 2013, he left the Van Halen legacy and focused on his own band, determined to break free from the past. He formed Mammoth WVH. His first album, self-titled, released solo with him playing every instrument, guitar, bass, drums, vocals, showed the world he could stand alone. The lead single, Distance, written in memory of his late father, hit hard rock #1 and earned him a Grammy nomination. For the first time in his adult life, Wolfgang wasn't defined by someone else's name. He was defining himself. Each note he played was not homage, it was declaration. His grief, his pain, his hope, his future. In 2023, he performed at major venues, opened for big acts, and even played at the Oscars alongside big stars. In those moments, the world stopped seeing Eddie's name on stage. They saw Wolfgang, raw and real. Despite the shadows that once haunted him, Wolfgang Van Halen now stands not as a ghost in his father's legacy, but as a man who remade that legacy into something new. The boy who once tapped magazines as drums became a man who built a world with his own sound. And this is his transformation, a journey of heartbreak, grief, pressure, doubt, but also of courage, reinvention, identity, and strength. Wolfgang Van Halen's transformation is taking the world by storm. But Wolfgang's rise didn't come without consequences. Fame had always been a double-edged sword for him. But after the release of his first Mammoth WVH album, the pressure intensified in ways he never expected. He was no longer just the son of Eddie Van Halen. He was now a frontman, a songwriter, a one-man musical engine responsible for every sound the world heard. And with that came a new kind of spotlight, one that demanded perfection. The touring cycle that followed tested him mentally and physically. Every night he stepped onto a stage carrying an invisible weight, the pressure to honor his father, to defend the band's name, and to hold his own identity together under thousands of eyes. People expected him to smile, to shred, to be strong. But they didn't see the moments backstage when grief hit him like a tidal wave, or the nights he questioned whether the world would ever see him as anything other than the Van Halen kid. Yet every time he touched his guitar, something shifted. The stage became the one place where the noise quieted, where the comparisons fell away, replaced by the raw truth of who he was becoming. Fans began noticing it too. His voice carried more confidence. His riffs felt bolder, and the aggression in his sound had purpose. He wasn't running from his father's legacy anymore. He was building his own beside it. Then came Mammoth 2, a defining moment not just in his career but in his life. Once again, performing every instrument himself, Wolfgang proved his evolution wasn't a fluke. He was truly an artist shaped by discipline rather than reputation. The world finally began hearing him as Wolfgang Van Halen. Not Eddie's son, not a kid filling in on bass, but a powerhouse of modern rock. What people didn't see was how much he sacrificed to get there. The long nights in the studio fueled by grief, the anxiety that came with releasing music so personal it felt like ripping open scars, and the constant internal battle between honoring the past and claiming the future. But 2023 brought another shift, one not tied to stages or studios. Wolfgang got married, starting a chapter grounded in love rather than pressure. His wife Andrea became a quiet, anchoring presence, a reminder that he didn't have to carry everything alone. Even as he stepped deeper into the spotlight, he finally had a place that felt like home. With every year that passes, Wolfgang grows more comfortable with the truth that his transformation isn't about replacing a legend. It's about standing beside one while becoming something entirely different. A man shaped by loss, driven by passion, and defined not by his father's name, but by the fire he built from the ashes of it. And now, as his music spreads across the world, that fire is burning brighter than ever.